At 11, the collectorate looked even more crowded than usual. There were many more jeeps. Revenue officers meeting, sir. All the 4 SDOs and 10 tehsildars have come, said Chidambaram. Collector Saab said you should attend and handed him a sheet of paper. I can't read this. Don't you have an English version? Chidambaram handed him another sheet of paper. On the top of the cyclo-style sheet was Agenda for Monthly Review Meeting of Revenue Officers, Madna. Below it, he read some of the topics: revenue drive, recovery of government dues, misappropriation of government money by Patwaris, revenue case pendency, agricultural census, pending pension cases. Nice topics, he said to Chidambaram. Sir, Menon Saab wants to meet you. He's waiting in collector's chamber. Who is he? Asked Agastya conspiratorially. Sir, he's IAS, sir. Chidambaram sounded outraged at his ignorance. 2 years senior to you, subdivisional magistrate of Rameri. Menon was large and fair, with a loud, shrill voice. Later in the year, Agastya was to conclude that Menon's smugness was endemic in IAS officers in the district. In its best form, it was exhibited in Shrivistar as a confidence and undemonstrative pleasure in the job, an attitude obscurely irritating. Rajan, whom Agastya met on one November evening at the collector's with his egregious pomposity, was its worst example. He was compelled to infer that the job was responsible. Kumar corroborated his views during the weekend they spent at Mardi Gras. I don't know how it is in other countries, Kumar said, but in India, from washing your arse to dying, an ordinary citizen is up against the government. And your senior IAS bastards swell up because of the power they fool around with, especially in a district. To be able to play God over, say, 17,000 kilometers is not, conducive to humility. You see, Sen, India has had a tradition of bureaucracy. Aha, Sen, said Menon. Glad to meet you. When did you come? They sat down. Again Agastya was asked to categorize himself, and again he lied, although cautiously. I see, said Menon. So you're from Calcutta. Good. Education? Yes, I'm educated. No, I mean, of course you are. But where were you educated? Cambridge. You don't say. I was there myself. Trinity. Went there for my BA. Oops, thought Agastya. Cambridge, Massachusetts. Oh, yes, of course. They have one over there, too. A peon scurried in. Collector Saab's car has been seen, sir, near the pond, and began building his skyscrapers of files. Menon picked up his papers from the table. Have you read this? He handed Agastya a large green book, Ruth Prower, Javala's Heat and Dust. I borrowed it from the collectorate library because I was told it was about an assistant collector's life in the British days. But it's not really about that. Agastya flipped the pages. Many passages were underlined. All of them seemed to be about an assistant collector touring in the early morning to avoid the title. Comments in red ballpoint in the margin. Not necessary these days to wear sole topi, relic of the Raj, the bureaucracy to be Indianized. An difficult question. An officer's wife should mix with others, but without jeopardizing the dignity of office. Someone's been scribbling in the book, said Agastya. Yes, I thought I should put down what I feel strongly about so that other readers have at least a choice of opinion. Otherwise, they might think that even now this is all that goes on in an Indian district. The collectorate hall was large and shabby, with pigeons on the ventilators and portraits on the walls. Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore, Tilak, and a Tamsavinian mutilation of what could have been either Sarojini Naidu or a turbanless C.V. Raman. All the seats directly under the fans had been taken by soft, middle-aged men. An orange standing fan, terribly new, had been placed behind the collector's chair. It was going to be, thought Augustia, at least 6 hours of shifting one's buttocks on wood and clandestinely flicking one's sweat onto other people out of boredom and incomprehension. The collector came in, scowling. He usually put on his official face in the car. Everyone stood up. He sat down and began shrieking. Augustia opened his file, rearranged some papers in a suitably official manner, and wrote letters for about an hour. To his father first, a long descriptive letter, cautiously funny, concealing his sense of dislocation. His father perhaps would have understood, but he would also have been saddened. Life for him was a serious, rather noble business, a blend of Marcus Aurelius and the Reader's Digest, and on occasions, Augustia felt quite apart from him. He did wonder at times what his mother would have been like, but more out of curiosity than deprivation. The aunts of Calcutta had substituted sufficiently well. In her photographs, his mother looked plain but happy and somehow irresponsible, ready for oddities, for marrying a Bengali Hindu, for dying of meningitis. A letter to Drupo of vile, amusing anecdotes about Madna, the majority concocted, the rest exaggerated. Even to Drupo he felt shy of revealing his real feelings. Perhaps he was too embarrassed, or his feelings too confused or too secret. But some of his self did seep through the words he used like a stain. A third letter to Neera in Calcutta, and a fourth to his uncle Pultukaku in Delhi, much like the letter to his father. The meeting continued. The collector continued, too, to exhort his subordinates in the revenue department to greater efficiency and competence. They all nodded, seemed to take notes, and wiped their sweat. Theirs was an admirable strategy for meetings. By seeming to take notes, they could while away the time, could keep their heads down, and thereby avoid, for brief intervals, the collector's attention, which meant wrath could cover the blankness of their minds. Some could even get letters done. 12:15, and the collector hadn't yet reached the second topic. Augustia marveled yet again at Shrivastov's fluency in the language and watched his scowls and sideburns. I can't waste my day like this, he thought suddenly, listening to an alien tongue on alien topics, and then smiled. Certainly, waste was the wrong word when he was doing what he was being paid to do. From behind Ahmed, the deputy collector direct recruit said, "Sir, Collector Saab is looking at you." He stopped smiling. He left soon after, very purposefully, as though he had much work to do elsewhere. From Chidambaram's cubbyhole, he rang up the superintendent of police. "Sir, I wanted to call on you formally at your office." "Array, I shall be honored by." "Honored!" "When, sir? May I come now?" "Array, any time." "Yes, of course. Come now." On a sheet of paper he wrote, "Sir, I wanted to call on the SP and he asked me to his office at 12:30 sharp. I shall return to the meeting after finishing there." He gave the note to Chidambaram. "Just take this to the collector a little later." The road to the SP's lay past the wild cannabis. He casually pocketed a few leaves. On the road, he watched the road to avoid the holes and the varieties of excrement. He tied his new napkin over his ears. A buffalo passed by, and with a casual whisk of its tail, deposited some dung on his forearm. "Oh, you bastard," said Augustia. He scraped the dung off on a tree and smelt his arm. The stench remained. He began to laugh. Oh, how insane his existence was. It even included getting shit off his arms. An old and mean constable at the door, suspicious. The SP asked me to meet him at 12:30. Even to Augustia, it sounded unlikely. Maybe I should shave my beard, he thought, and my head, grow a paunch, and wear a wig of short, flat, oiled hair. "Han, Sen, come in." Kumar's fat forearm waved him to a chair. There was another man in the room. He was large and soft as though he had once lifted weights with gusto and one day, abruptly, realized the foolishness of all exertion. A red face, blood, booze, and joy. On his lap, a copy of the BBC TV serial Yes Minister. Sen, meet Mr. Govind Sati. Agastya shook hands. You are the AIS trainee. Are you the Joker of Madna? They all laughed. Where did you hear that? The room was paneled entirely in wood. One whole wall had things written on it, lists of the SPs of Madna, the number of dacoities, murders, thefts in the last year, the names of police stations. Sati is a yellow journalist. See, he looks it. Sati laughed. He laughed fully with his whole body. He said, Mr. Sen probably hasn't yet seen a small-town newspaper. Some of them are just one sheet, a little bigger than my palm. The dailies come out on the days when they can cook up some scandal or gory story. The weeklies on the Sundays when there's some gossip to report. Kumar ordered coffee. These newsmen live on blackmail. You see, each one of your lower officials has, what's the phrase, skeletons in his cupboard. The goondas here, when they aren't rioting, go to the bigger newspapers and say, make me your reporter. I'll be stationed in Madna. No salary, just what you'd call it, accreditation. He makes enough through blackmail. Of course, some are bold enough to attack the highest officer, our collector, said Sati and began laughing boisterously. Sen, do you know this? Asked Kumar, his torso jiggling with joy. What the Dainik said about the BDO? You must try and follow the Dainik. It's the best way to pick up the language. He turned to Sati. But the collector has written to the government for permission to prosecute. A good move. The case will be defamation against the post of the collector. Then government will bear the charges of the case. That is, if anyone ever replies to his letter. If he sued personally, it'd be expensive. And he just might lose. More laughter. Today's Dainik has a few new pieces against the minister. Yes, I saw that. Nothing new. But it's disgusting newspaper. Kumar suddenly turned virulent. It says highway dacoities have increased because the police don't patrol roads. What do they mean? What do they know of what they write? Sitting in small, smelly offices blackmailing people. Can any police patrol highways? Bastards, they always go on about our responsibility. What about theirs? But these dacoities and murders have been increasing. You know, the one that happened a week ago down the lane from the hotel. Sati turned to Agastya. 4 dacoits killed 3 people, parents and child. They bashed the child's face in with one of the clocks in the house. At about 12 in the afternoon. Yes, the kind of case that you only read about in the papers. That happens to someone else, in some other colony, in some other part of town. Agastya felt a little sick, as though someone had lightly snicked his testicles. They could visit him too. One kick in the balls, they could crush his face with cassette recorder before they took it away. He thought of his room without music. A knock on the door. Another constable whose boots detonated on the floor as he saluted. He handed Kumar a file. Kumar read it for a minute or two and then, with his elbow on the table, swiveled his hand and forearm in a gesture of utter incomprehension. The constable mumbled something. Kumar got up, said, Excuse me, Hein, just a minute. Straightened his shirt over his lard and went out. He's gone for some shady deal, said Sati, or a bribe. Which newspaper do you work for? Sati laughed. I'm not a yellow journalist at all. You've probably never met my kind before. They are a small, disrespectable breed. I'm a cartoonist. Sati had large, rather sad eyes. I crack dull jokes every morning in 4 Marathi dailies, all published from Bombay and Pune. Pune to you. Then what are you doing in Madna? Why, I like the place. Sati laughed and had to put down his cup because he couldn't restrain himself. With a question like that, you really reveal yourself, Mr. Sen. your past, your bewilderment and boredom. Aren't you surprised at seeing me in Madna? I wear Levi's and read Yes, Minister. He touched the book, rifling through it to see if I can steal some jokes, but their bureaucrats and politicians are so civilized and dull. No, I'm just new to this place. That's all. To a whole world. Are you very busy? If not, why don't you join me for lunch? He thought of the revenue meeting. Sure, thanks. Sati finished his coffee. There's a forest service officer here who knows you. Says you and he were on the same floor in the hostel in your college days. Mahendra Bhatia. Oh yes, of course. Bhatia was just an acquaintance to whom Agastya used to nod on the stairs or in the college dining hall, but he knew that in Madna they would meet effusively, claiming from their pasts an amity that had never been. In a strange place, meeting an acquaintance was somehow worse than meeting a stranger. An acquaintance was neither stranger nor a friend with whom one had to make adjustments. He was unknown yet unfamiliar. He was unknown yet familiar, like the hinterland. He brought back the old life and its memories, but none of the consolations of remembrance. He told me about you. You must beware of the grapevine of a small town, by the way. Don't do anything here you wouldn't do in front of your mother. The SP returned with incoherent apologies. I have to go, Yar. Something important has come up. Why don't you two have dinner with me tomorrow? 8-ish. Good, thought Agastya. That's one more meal away from Vizant. Sati said, something more shady than important, Kumar Saab. Not in front of innocents, joker. Kumar patted Agastya's shoulder avuncularly. One day, Sati, some constables might pay you a late-night visit. He neighed a laugh and left. Sati's car was a red Maruti. Cartoonists make a lot of money? Asked Agastya. Sati laughed. No, it's not really my car. It's one of the family cars. And laughed again. The car slunk away from the police station in low gear. One of these centuries, they're going to improve this road. So many offices here and just 2 approach roads. Now they're building that TV transmitter here. Yes, TV's coming to Madna. Oh, they say in 3 months' time. That could mean anything between tomorrow and the day when the Darth Vader meets Jesus. TV's a good election stunt, Hein. Please the also pitiable rural populace and place your faces in front of their faces for 4 hours a day. Elections too. But there's a by-election here in Madna before that. You'll be watching a lot of that, won't you, as part of training? You should study your own revenue gang during election time, how they puff themselves up. Impossible, thought Agastya, that Sati spoke so openly about everything naturally. He sounded as though he was obliged to be unconventional. The car moved beside the train tracks, slowly entangling itself in the web of pedestrians and rickshaws. A monstrously overloaded truck struggled by, its speed belying its roar. Sati stopped on top of the bridge. A beggar reclined against the railing, steadying his toe. He had the hairdo of some Western rock superstar. I like the view from here, said Sati, while Agastya wondered why they had stopped. The train tracks aimed straight at the heat haze on the horizon, an enticing passage to another world. 500 yards away, the sad railway station and its yards with the hillocks of coal. On the left, the old and shabby office buildings that had ignored all the decades of an undramatic history. The flags patient in the heat, the pawn, the buffalo with the dots of children prancing on their backs, the people who waited for government to be kind to them in white dhoti, kurta, and napkin. On the right, beyond the station yard, the town crawling all over the ruins of the 18th century fort of the obscure tribal king who had given Madna its name. The whole seemed to have been bypassed by all that had made history and news, had remained impervious to the Mughals and 1857 and Bandi Mataram and the third mid-century travail and the mid-century travails of megapolitan India. In the distance, cutting off the inch line of forest. The futuristic structure of the new thermal power station is still threatening the sky beside the shrunken river, waiting for rain to flood the district and remind its people of the horrors that customarily lay beyond the orbit of their lives. For all those who ever wanted to see the country and sat around in the hotels of Bombay cribbing about the waste of a holiday, and for all those whose vision so far has been circumscribed by the smog of Calcutta, said Sati lightly, and declutched. Sati lived in the newer part of town. The roads were still awful, but there was less of a crowd. New houses somehow incongruous in Madna, sad imitations of the big city. They're trying to make a metropolis out of Madna. Idiots, as though metropolises are good things. Some had planned greenery around their houses, but the ubiquitous cattle had taken care of the saplings. Sati slowed for a one-storied pink house. That's the one where they killed a child. He finally stopped at a house beside a hotel called the Madna International. Absurd name, isn't it? We own that damn thing. My father was a forest contractor here in Madna. You don't know what that means, do you? He arranged for the sale of timber and forest produce. Certainly a soul-squashing job, but he made lots of money. So I was educated in Bombay, and my elder brother even went to Geneva for a course in hotel management. That kind of money. He runs the hotel. It was built out of the money my father left us. It makes lots of money too. Come, let's go in here. The drawing room is far too ugly for display to what I'm sure must be a very refined taste. Yes, I live in this bit of the house. I'm not married. Too old for straight sex. Haha. My brother was my father's money-making sense. He saw the development of Madna years ago and said a hotel here would be a good idea to drag in executive type who has to go to all these factories and mills. I don't need money. Now, you see why I'm a cartoonist? The room was large and very untidy. Books and files even on the floor, an easel by the window, pencils and paintbrushes on the bed. Just sit somewhere. Why don't you have a whiskey? Sati switched on the air conditioner. Do you really read a lot, or is it just that it's nice to work surrounded by books? Asked Agastya. Sati paused at the door to laugh and disappeared. On the easel was an unfinished sketch. Sati drew well. It showed a man at a typewriter beside a window. Through the window, the Statue of Liberty. Agastya tried to guess the punchline. Sati returned with a uniformed waiter. This is going to be in real style. The hotel says today's fish tandoori and chicken shashlik, whatever that is, are very good. I said anything that doesn't give us food poisoning will do. The waiter poured them their drinks. I've been drinking quite a lot here, said Agastya. Yesterday was my first day. I drank with the deputy engineer, who seems to know you, Shankar. Laxman Shankar. Sati threw a few things off the bed and settled down on many cushions with a sigh. Tremendous fun to be with for an hour or so. He sings very well, by the way. He sang us a bit of Tumri. Excellent, I thought. You're interested in music? Beyond the noise of Western rock? I'm surprised. I thought you'd be part of our cola generation. My father calls it the generation that doesn't oil its hair. That's a nice phrase. Sati struggled upright to scout for a pencil and paper. I'm stealing it. I've used the cola generation at least 10 times. He looked at Agastya with sad eyes. I do this all the time. Pick other people's brains. And what will the line be for that joke? Agastya pointed to the easel. No, that won't work. It's too ambitious. The best cartoon can only suggest pettiness and absurdity, very rarely something more complex. Sati got off the bed and went to stand in front of the easel. Agastya didn't want to leave his chair but felt obliged to join him. This is a very ambitious one. I wanted to suggest an Indian writer writing about India after having spent many years abroad or living there. There are hundreds of them. Well, if not hundreds, at least 25. I find these people absurd, full with one mixed up culture and writing about another, What kind of audience are they aiming at? That's why their India is just not real, a place of fantasy or of confused metaphysics, a subcontinent of goons. All their Indians are caricatures. Why is that? Because there really are no universal stories, because each language is an entire culture. Sati moved to the table to put a kebab into his mouth. That is ambitious for a cartoon. Sati laughed and sprayed masticated kebab over the window pane. That made him laugh more. Still gurgling, he went to the bathroom for a towel and a mug of water. I live in anarchy. If I had spat kebabs out like that in your absence, I wouldn't have cleaned up at all. I would have watched the stains change color and texture over the days and wondered about mutability. While slushing water haphazardly over the window pane, he continued, "And this place is a continent, far too heterogeneous. Great literature has to have its regional tang. A great Tamil story, for instance, whose real greatness would be ultimately obscure to any non-Tamilian. Haven't you felt the heterogeneity in Madna? I presume you know at least 3 Indian languages, English, Hindi, and Bengali, yet you find it so difficult to communicate here. And 3 languages, you could be master of Europe." They were quite drunk by lunch, which was lavish and slow and the conversation desultory. While eating, Agastya planned how he could eat more often at Sati's. "Do I look very drunk?" "Yes, very. Why?" Sati's eyes now looked maudlin. "I have to go back to attend the rest of the collector's revenue meeting." They began to laugh helplessly. Agastya's fork dropped on the floor. He realized obscurely that he was to lead at least 3 lives in Madna, the official, with its social concomitants, the unofficial, which included boozing with Shankar and Sati, and later with Bhatia, and the secret in the universe of his room, which encompassed jogging by moonlight. Each world was to prove educative, and the world beyond Madna was continually to interrupt and disrupt him through letters and the radio and through ungovernable memories. When he was leading one Madna life, the other 2 seemed completely unsubstantial. He couldn't believe, for instance, that a few minutes' drive away from Sati's, the revenue meeting, from which he'd now been absent for 4 hours, was still going on. The transitions from one to either of the other 2 were not difficult, but that was only because he willed it so. But this volition would decline rapidly in the months and meetings that followed, and he would begin to fantasize about allowing his lives to merge. Looking at Shrivastava's scowls, he would want to interrupt a revenue meeting with, "If you will allow me to talk about a pressing personal matter, I feel that each one of you here should invite me home for dinner, because at the rest house I seem to be eating Vasant's turds." Hearing Kumar on the difficulties of being a good policeman, he would want to ask whether his semen also came out like a weak trickle from a limp tap. Then his fantasies would make him laugh silently. "I think it's a very bad idea," said Sati, "to go out in this heat to attend a revenue meeting." They convulsed with laughter again. Agastya washed his face and tried to look sober. Sati dropped him to the collectorate. "Thanks. That was a great afternoon." "You still look drunk." The collector was still shrieking, dehydrating his throat and drinking lots of water. Most heads were still down, and some seemed to be swaying with sleep. Everyone just looked more hot and tired. In 5 minutes, Agastya couldn't believe the afternoon. Sati, the ambitious, is sketched on the easel, the chicken shashlik. The meeting continued to drift past his ears. It ought to have convinced him that he should set about learning the language if he was really to get into his job. But throughout those months, he had the feeling that his situation was somehow temporary, that he just had to live out a few months, and that was all. But that in less than a year's time, he would be actually posted somewhere as assistant collector, behaving like Menon or Shrivastava, that seemed just too remote. He occasionally marveled at how little attention he was paying. To hide his red eyes, he opened his file and tried to look official. There were bound to be countless similar meetings, he thought, so on a clean sheet of government paper, thick and yellow with a left off-center blue line. He listed very neatly possible excuses for the future. He was dissatisfied with all except illness, and he wished to save that for more serious dodges. Besides, he thought, illness would work only once unless he could convince Shrivastov that his metabolism too followed a lunar cycle and that his bone-racking menstrual tension coincided with the revenue meetings. Then Shrivastov caught him laughing to himself again. Suddenly, a restlessness in the air, as in a class of school children minutes before the bell. The collector was emitting his concluding shrieks. Then outside, everyone stretched, grouped together, and chattered, and wandered away to their jeeps. Menon and Agastya followed the collector to his room. Shrivastov unwound over his 15th tea of the day. Oof, these fellows! Shout at them all day and practically no work gets done. Don't shout at them, and they'll do even less. He looked very tired. Menon, you bring Sen over this evening. Dinner. Rameri was 7 hours away, so Menon was staying the night, making a night halt in officialese at the circuit houses. He dropped Agastya to his room and said, "Why don't you freshen up and come over to my room in about an hour?" He pointed to the circus house. Agastya was surprised at his hectic social life in Madna, flitting from Sati to Shrivastov, and not all of it was boring. Of course, the combination of Shrivastov and Menon promised to be lethal. Later, when he reflected on his months in Madna, most of his meetings with so many new people blurred and merged into one single massive encounter, a melee of voices and opinions, angles of faces, twists of mouth, vagaries of accents of a single behemoth with a myriad tongues. He washed his face. The sting of water further reddened his eyes, while looking at them and wondering whether their veins would burst and emit tears of blood like some ancient prophecy or myth. He would then, he decided, go to his father and say quietly, "See what the job that you said was fulfilling is doing to me." He heard music from Shankar's room, and for a moment another life beckoned to him. Menon had really freshened up. Agastya suspected that he had shaved again. Beside his pinkness, he felt secretly unclean, as though he hadn't changed underwear he had climaxed in. "Ah, Sen, sit down. I've just asked for some tea." Perhaps if every day, thought Agastya discontentedly, he subjected his stomach to tea after whiskey, in time it would begin to crave for the combination. Menon's room was also furnished like a house. Who chooses the furniture for rest houses? Engineers? Or their wives? As in everything else, they make a lot of money from furniture too. But their taste, whined Agastya. The curtains of Menon's room had small red airplanes on green background. "Oh, I don't think you should be critical like that," said Menon solemnly. Agastya wondered if he could slap him many times, grab his hair and jerk his head off his neck and say, "Don't apply a different standard of aesthetics just because this is Madna and you've been to bloody Cambridge." Vasant entered with tea. "So you were at Cambridge Mass, as they say. What was it like?" "Nice," said Agastya cautiously. "It's a very good thing to join the Indian Administrative Service after a stint abroad," said Menon, pushing 3 spoons of sugar into his cup. "It's the best job possible in the Indian context. You'll realize that very soon, and having been abroad gives you a better perspective. Oh, yes, even on furniture." Menon looked at him intently but let the remark pass because it made no sense, and therefore perhaps he had misheard it. Agastya laughed silently at the thought that if he had heard of Menon from someone else, he would have been curious to meet him.